I'm Rich Ivry, and I'm a professor of psychology and neuroscience at UC Berkeley. Well, we do a number of things in the lab related to human performance, and big theme recently has been about sensory motor learning and control, and in particular, like what are the different sorts of neural systems that are engaged when people execute a skilled movement. Clearly, we can have like a movement intention. We have a goal. I want to pick up my coffee cup here. But a skilled movement is one that, in a sense, feels effortless, right? That I can just I don't feel like I'm really having to think through what my body does, but it kind of runs on its own and just smoothly can grasp the cup. It doesn't matter where it is, but I can almost reach directly to it, anticipate the amount of water in there. It's a pretty complicated coordination task there, but we seem to do it so effortlessly and obviously essential to so many of our daily activities. Well, it's almost embarrassing to say that it builds on questions that led me to graduate school initially. I think I wrote in my graduate school application that I was interested in why some people are more coordinated than others. And that probably reflects the fact that while I loved to play sports, I was never very good at most sports. And it just didn't seem fair for all the hours of practice that I put in, why other people just seem to be so much more graceful. So I got interested in that. And then over the years, I've really been fascinated by the literature on expert performance and elite performance, and especially some, really classic studies saying that some of the principles that underlie why someone's great in basketball seem to be very similar to, why someone's great in making music or playing chess. So what are these similarities across different domains that, account for elite performance? Yeah, so our favorite actually goes back to experimental methods that have been around over 100 years. In fact, the founder of the UC Berkeley psychology department did some of the most classic experiments here, where he wore these glasses, or one glass that turned the world upside down, and he kept it on for weeks and wanted to see. Of course, initially he was stumbling around wildly, but over time he actually became quite graceful at being able to walk around the world. Over the last 100 years, people have had different ways to perturb the environment, to introduce some sort of change in the environment and look to see how the body adjusts to that. Classically in psychology, people use what are called prism glasses that shift the world laterally. So if I was to reach for my coffee cup, my hand might initially go there, and we can look at how the system gets recalibrated. We use a slightly fancier kind of virtual reality system, but it's a very simple one where we tend to again, have people do reaching movements, but we rotate the visual feedback. So if I was reaching straight ahead and I have a rotation, I'd see my hand as if it's going off to the side. And again, this is a way to look at how does the motor system recalibrate itself over a short period of time. And if I think about how that might relate to, what's happening in the real world, well, actually this recalibration process is going on all the time, but we don't think about it. So for instance, if I'm inside and I'm reaching for this coffee cup again, but now I go outside and it's a really cold day and I put on a heavy sweater and a heavy jacket, well, actually the motor commands would be somewhat different because now I'm carrying a lot more weight in my arm. And somehow, though, we can recalibrate for that all the time. We don't think about it. It's not like I have to go outside and practice, reaching with a heavy jacket. It happens in a very automatic, implicit way. They do a classic division that we can borrow in the motor world, comes from the memory literature, the study of people with different types of amnesia, and a very broad distinction has been made between what are so-called explicit memories, those that we're aware of and conscious of, and we might, think about, actively recall, and those that are more implicit, that are happening automatically, because we know that much of mental life is happening below the level of consciousness, so that Explicit, implicit is a nice way to describe different memory systems or different learning systems. Now, within the motor world, in our studies on sensory motor adaptation, we've actually seen that there's quite a contrast between the explicit system sort of being concerned about trying to figure out what it is I want to do in the world. Like what's the proper action to take. And that seems to be kind of driven by kind of reward signals. Like I make an action, I see if it's successful, and if it's successful, it increases the likelihood that I'm going to choose that action in the future. So in the tennis, for instance, I like to use the example about suppose I'm playing against an opponent who's at the net. I have to decide, do I try to lob the ball over the opponent or do I try to hit a passing shot? And that seems to be something that might be associated with the cerebral cortex, about taking in the current context and figuring out, based on my past experience, what's the right shot to try to make. But to actually execute that movement, well, that's more in that implicit domain where I talked about that might be more error-based learning. So now, let's say I try to hit the stroke and try to do the passing stroke, and I don't succeed because I mishit the ball. Well, now I'm going to have this error-based system that's going to try to improve it so that the next time I make that shot, I'll actually be successful there. We actually see that there's a real segregation between the so-called what to do and this how to do system, that the two, of course, are usually working hand in hand, but there's two very different learning systems that are working on very different sorts of information and different types of feedback signals. Certainly one striking example is from work I did with people who had so-called split brain procedure as part of their treatment for their epilepsy, where they disconnect the two hemispheres. And there, it's cited in textbooks, but it's really striking when I would do something like, I remember one time asking her, what she was reading. And she said, I'm reading a book. And then she reached out with her left hand, and handed me a book and immediately said, that's not the book I'm reading. So here was a case where, in her mind, she knew what she wanted to do. Her motor system executed this very beautiful movement of picking up the book and handing it to me. And then she realized, there's a mismatch between what my motor system actually executed and what I actually wanted to be doing. Now there it's a case of perhaps it's a lack of the communication between the two hemispheres, but we can play that same game. We actually see it in our own research, where we can kind of look at learning and memory systems that are dependent on the cerebral cortex and those that are actually happening at a more automatic level and strongly associated with the subcortical structures like the cerebellum. Going back to my theme about being a clumsy guy and thinking about this, conflict between what you want to do and then how you actually execute it. I hate it when I'm trying to pull the blankets up and punch myself in the face.